Hi, this is Coach World TV. I'm Laurie Lawson, and my guest tonight is Carolyn Esposito. Welcome, Carolyn.
Hi, Laurie. Thanks for having me.
I have to tell you, I had her on Coach Chat Radio, and we had such a great time on that. I said, oh, you got to come on the show and do it all over again. So we're going to find out just what's so great about her. Carolyn's an executive coach, and she's also the president and founder of Talent Pathways Incorporated, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Real deal. She's not playing. It's a real deal, yes. And so really what I always am fascinated with is, and when I found out when she started coaching, I was really fascinated. How did you get into coaching?
Well, actually, I've been coaching probably since the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And I got into it because I had a strong background in learning and development, and I was a facilitator. So from there, I started designing programs that incorporated a lot of coaching within the training, and from there, I started doing more and more one-on-one. So
let me ask you, because it was the 80s, and because I think I discovered coaching in 2004, but I'm always amazed to find that other people knew what they were doing way before I did. Did you know you were coaching, or were you? Was it just a lucky thing? How did that work?
Oh, I definitely didn't know I was coaching until well into the 90s.
Right,
Yeah.
when they labeled it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were kind of consulting, but what, obviously consulting is telling people what to do, and coaching is kind of teaching them how to fish, so to speak. How's that for mixing metaphors? But yeah.
I think the consultative piece of it is about asking a lot of questions, but you're right, as a consultant, you really give a lot of advice, and that's what people expect. I think the roots of coaching for me were in the facilitation process, so having groups of people together and facilitating their self-discovery around an issue. So I never did the kind of training that was, 1 + 1 = 2. It was more people dynamics. How do you have a conversation with someone? How do you give someone feedback? And when I was teaching those kind of things and designing programs for that, I found myself coaching small groups, and from that getting requests to coach one-on-one. And some point, along the line with all of this facilitation that I was doing, someone pointed out to me, you know what you're doing? You're coaching. And I said, really? I am?
Who knew?
Yeah. Who knew?
But I like what I'm doing, so I'll keep doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what kind of, and I know coaching has come into its own and has, is quite popular now. What kind of, I can't imagine in the 80s, because I was working then hard and climbing that career ladder. How was that received, or did you do it on the sneak?
Well, here's the evolution. It's really interesting. In 1988, I had been with the Hertz Corporation for 10 years, and before I left, I was in charge of customer service training. And we would go into a region and look at, again, the people dynamics, and we had internal auditors who would say, they would be able to measure that customers were or were not satisfied. And we got very proficient at going into a region, looking at the people dynamics, figuring out who was really good at interacting with someone else and who was average, and identify the gap, and we would train to that. So that was sort of the start of it. In 1988, when I left there and started consulting, I was doing a lot of work for international airlines, hotels, mostly in the travel industry.
So customer service, so to speak, was, because I'm just thinking was that a valued thing in corporations in the 80s? But it's certainly in airlines and hotels, they've always been on to the trick that you got to have happy customers. Yeah.
Exactly. So, what we did was, I started doing these needs assessments where I would sit in an airport and just watch the dynamic between people.
Oh, I want that job.
It was so much fun, and eventually we started noticing these patterns. People were really great at interacting with one another until a stress point happened, and in the travel industry, stress happens all the time. So we would notice that there were certain behavioral patterns. So under stress, people would either become very aggressive or outcome oriented. They would either withdraw. You know, they would retreat, or they would become super, super friendly and almost manipulative, you know, to try and get what they wanted. And so once we started seeing these behavioral patterns, I started teaching classes around this. And again, to try and get the groups, you know, involved and going, I started dividing them into smaller groups and either coaching them as groups or teaching them how to coach one another so that they could do that back on the job. And
Wow.
so having done that, you know, as a consultant for about 6 years, then I went back into corporate and brought a lot of that with me. And I think that's when the coaching industry was really coming up, you know, and being labeled as coaching.
Right.
And I sort of dovetailed there.
Wow. Okay, so you were ahead of your time. You just weren't really sure what you were doing, but you were doing it all right.
I don't know if it was ahead of my time, but whatever I was doing, I was doing.
It was working. Okay.
No, but it's been a really, I think, a nice glide path, if you will, to executive coaching. Yeah.
That's interesting because I never thought of the service industries, but of course they would be more amenable and open to having some coaching done because it's really important for people to interact on, you know, with customers. I think I was telling you, I know that when MBAs became the hot degree, it was like everybody got an MBA and they were being snapped up and hired immediately. It was so exciting. And then the corporate people were going, but they don't know how to work with people. They just know the figures. It's like something has to change. And if I'm not wrong, I think they did change the MBA degree to have a little humanity, just a little bit of how you deal with people.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually do some work with some of the MBA programs here in New York, and I'm so impressed with the way these schools have evolved. Everything is all about, they teach them to work in teams, they teach them to be leaders, they teach them to do peer coaching with one another.
Wow.
So imagine they're learning that and not just the numbers, so to speak, and then they go into these organizations and bring these skills. And from my perspective as both a consultant and a coach in organizations, it's interesting to see when an MBA comes into an organization and the leaders there haven't caught up to that skill set yet.
Very interesting. So tell us, where did I like the name Talent Pathways? Where did that come from?
Well, you know, it used to be called, what I did used to be called either learning and performance strategy or organization development, and I think the lingo has changed over the years to talent management and talent development. And so I was sitting around, you know, having a few drinks with friends and brainstorming different names, and I knew I wanted talent in there. And then, you know, as they asked me questions, as like good coaches, all of a sudden I thought, well, we have to put people on the right path or help people find their path, and that's
Bingo.
how, Talent Pathways. Yeah.
Now, do people think maybe that you
I know where you're going.
book them for a cabaret and get them in a Broadway show and stuff like that?
Yes, I actually once had the Better Business Bureau contact me with a complaint about somebody who had signed her daughter up for tap dancing lessons. So I had to straighten that one out.
There's a lot of coaching going on there, yes. Let me coach the BBB, but okay.
Yeah, but usually in business circles, they understand it perfectly.
Do they?
Yeah, sure.
I'm kind of surprised. But I guess I guess to them, talent equals potential, and they're all about that. What are you doing? What are your current things that you're doing with? I mean, who comes to you? Do people come to you? I want talent, or do corporations come and go? I got some bad employees. How does this work? Who comes to you? A little bit of everything.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. Some companies come to me because they have a certain population, maybe a typical high potential group of people, and they want to develop them. So we talk about what development means to them, and sometimes that means I design either a strategy for how they're going to develop their people. Sometimes as part of that strategy, I'll design training programs or group coaching initiatives, and sometimes it's one-on-one coaching.
I love that. So you're saying that if a corporation calls you in, then you're going to the top guy and say, what is it that you want? You're going to let him be a part of the goal setting process.
Oh, absolutely. That's my ideal client, is to work, and it doesn't have to be the CEO. It can be the head of a division within an organization. But that's my ideal client. I'd prefer to work for the business head even more so than human resources.
Oh, yeah.
But I love.
I have a human resources background,
Yeah.
so I understand
Yeah.
that perfectly.
Yeah.
Yes.
As do I, and and I love my human resources clients. They're wonderful. But I think my career has always been, internal, working for the business, and so that's a sweet spot for me. And if I can consult with the head of a business and work with them on what is your strategy from a business perspective, and then what do you expect your people to be able to do, and who are the key people within your organization, we can create a strategy that around people development that is very comprehensive, everything from orientation and onboarding programs to competency models for leaders or key talent, to new hire programs that I can design and then teach them to run. Often I incorporate coaching within that, but I also have clients who hire me just for coaching, and I actually even have a client right now who runs a global organization, and they've hired me to teach coaching skills to their human capital business partners.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that is I think that makes you unique simply because I think the corporate, and it's been a while since I've worked corporate, but the corporate people that I know, the leaders, are just like, oh my God, we need training. Let me go get somebody. Oh, I hear she's good. Go in and train. And they don't have a clue about what's the purpose of the training. It's like, I think they feel like they're satisfying a need for their employees. They're doing what they feel is ethically right. But you're making them a part of it. Do you get any resistance, or are they prepared, or are they like, what? I have to do more than pay the bill?
I do get resistance, and actually one of my goals, and I've worked with a coach on this myself, is to learn who is the right client to work with. And I press back a lot and say, ask the questions. What is your strategy? What do you want to get out of this training? And what I've worked with a coach on is to turn away business when it's not the right client.
Well, now, wouldn't you like to have that problem? I'm so sorry. I'm just turning you away. But I know, I understand perfectly what you mean.
Yeah.
And I admire that. I have to admire that. It's like, you've set a goal for yourself. These are my goals. This is what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish when you get in that company?
I think in a very broad sense, I'm really all about making coaching practical in organizations. I think I'd love to see for us to get to a point where leaders not only get promoted up to a role because they're very technically competent, but because they understand how to work with others, how to give feedback, how to accept feedback, how to really get in touch with what their derailers are, under stress, as I talked about before. Under stress, we all have them, and so if people can learn that and learn not only how to coach themselves, if you will, but to coach one another, that would be ideal. And I know that's a big, broad vision, but that's how I'd love to help organizations.
Wow. Yeah, I think we'd all like to see that happen too. We'd have a lot more peace and love and joy going on.
In the world, right? Yeah,
that would be good. What are some of the? I have to assume, and I don't want to be a negative person. I have to assume that there are challenges in with this goal, and I love the goal. The goal would be really, especially now since everybody's working under stress. I can't imagine there are any cushy jobs anymore. What are some of the challenges that you face with that? And maybe how do you overcome them? If you don't want to give away all your trade secrets, but a few we could use.
Well, I think recognition that there is a problem. Right now, especially coming out of the recession, organizations are running very lean. People who have been left in their roles have taken on a lot more responsibility, so the theme is doing more with less. And what that has often meant is people have been promoted because they're technically competent. So you might be the greatest IT person, or you might be the greatest finance person, and suddenly you're promoted to a role where you maintain that technical capability, but you have to manage people. And they've never done that before. They're completely unaware of the fact that there's a challenge there. So that's a big challenge to overcome in organizations. And So if I can work with a business leader who recognizes that in his or her staff and hires me to help them with that, that's one way in terms of coaching. Another challenge is the fact that so many companies have gone global today. And so you send someone from the United States, for instance, overseas to go work, in Asia or Europe, and they're really experiencing culture shock. They don't know what the local customs are. And I'm not talking about just how to handshake properly.
Right.
I'm talking about the fact that people were just raised differently in terms of how they interact with one another. And so they often need coaching on how to acclimate into a new culture.
It's interesting because I was telling you I'm involved with a game called Points of View, and it's all a visual thing with cards. And one of the cards had a kid who was holding some girl's hand, and behind his back he had his fingers crossed. And so my American interpretation of that was, what a sneaky little guy. It's like whatever he just told her, he's lying about. But I was on an international call today. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I was on an international call today, and they were going, "Oh, and that's so good. He feels like he's so lucky, and he has his fingers crossed." And I went, "You know what? That this may not mean, I'm not. What I'm saying isn't true. That's what we were growing up with.
That's how we.
I would say anything, and as long as you had your fingers crossed, it wasn't a lie. But in another country, so that's got to be. What do you do with that? I mean, you can't acclimate them to the entire culture. So, what are some of the tips that you give them?
Well, I think one of the biggest tips is, depending upon the culture you are in, it takes time to build relationships.
Yes.
And here we just expect everything to happen overnight,
Oh, absolutely.
So, stepping back, taking time to build a relationship, doing your homework, really, understanding, learning about, what the differences are. I think I was telling you about this very simple model that I teach.
Yes.
And it's so simple it sounds
and this
ridiculous.
Is not for just. This is for other people. This is for everybody. I love it.
Yeah, but I call it a self-coaching model, and it's observe, respond, exchange, ORE. And I teach people to observe, to become very aware of what you're observing. Observe with all 5 senses, so not just what you're seeing and hearing, but think about how does it feel. Like, are the hairs on your arms standing up as you're experiencing this? Is it the pit of your stomach?
Giving you a sour taste in your mouth.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. You can observe with all 5 senses. And so observe the behavior of the person you're interacting with, but most importantly, then turn it inward and observe, what am I experiencing? What's my reaction? And think about that knee-jerk reaction. Do you want to get angry? Do you want to get in that person's face? Do you want to retreat and shut down the conversation? And once you become aware of that, you then choose how you're going to respond. That's the respond piece of it. And the goal of the whole thing is to reach some kind of an exchange. So even if you agree to disagree, in a contentious situation, at least both parties have been heard, and that's what real communication is, and you reach that exchange. And I've taught that in the past as a communication model, but lately I've been teaching it as a self-coaching model, and it's so interesting because you have to live the talk, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I found myself lately in a lot of situations where I'm like, okay, stop, take a breath, observe
Why am
your
I
reaction.
angry? Yeah. What happened? How did this happen? Tell us what the ORE is for again.
So it's observe, respond, exchange. And again,
Okay.
I think the real key is in the observe piece, because that's where you're coaching yourself to observe the other and yourself.
Well, I agree, but I think the most powerful for me would be the response part, because it's like, okay, I just would get mad. It's like, but to figure out, okay, why am I getting, or to realize that, every time I talk to this person, I'm angry, and it's like, what's happening?
Why? Exactly?
I would say it has to be them, but I think you need some introspection and to say,
You do.
that this could be something that has nothing to do with this poor person.
Right.
It's just
Right, it's
pushing
all
one of my
about me,
buttons.
right,
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, teaching, doing this yourself, but also teaching others how to become aware of the signals within your own body when you experience somebody else's behavior, because those triggers can help you identify the knee-jerk reaction before you launch into a tirade with someone. Or,
Yeah, it could save especially I know the whole gun thing anything, it's like, oh, now our
Yeah.
we solve our problem, just go get a gun. That's it. And so I think
Scary.
the poor kids are going, whatever happened to fights in the schoolyard?
Right.
We could, but no.
Yeah.
So to actually think about what you're doing and why
Yeah.
would be an amazing thing. So good for you. And this, you bring this to the corporate world too.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I actually started this again years ago when I was working with all of the travel industry companies, and again, those service interactions can become very heated, or and so I first started working with that model, and I've since developed it, and I'm teaching it to coaches who. Well, I'm teaching leaders in organizations to learn coaching skills, and so as they take it out to the managers they work with, they needed a way to think about how they were interacting with leaders. So my goal, as I said, is to cascade coaching, laser coaching throughout organizations.
The old trickle-down theory?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think I was telling you, because I was there for a while before and I don't say, I never got to the real top, but I mean, I was always middle management. I never started, I started my career that way. And I think that's one of the most difficult positions to be in, because you're a buffer,
Right.
You're a buffer, you
are.
take it from below, you take it from, and I think that would be such a great skill for just middle management. So when you say leadership, you're not talking like the CEO, the C-suite, so to speak. You're talking all leaders.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. It can be the C-suite, but I think really where organizations can make the greatest impact is that level, 1 and 2 levels below the executive suite, because these are the people who, by and large, had the technical skills, as we were talking about before, and they really, in many cases, never learned about communication, feedback, patience,
Right.
I mean, all of these things.
Yeah.
And again, organizations are changing constantly, so just when you get comfortable, another wave of change is coming at you. And, that, again, causes a stress point, and it can cause people to derail.
Well, what changes, since you've been hanging out since in the 80s,
Yeah.
and what changes have you seen in the work field? I mean, and I'll answer your question for you now. It's
Go ahead, please do.
I know some of the rules have changed, or there are no rules. But what do you think is like some of the big stressors today?
Well, as I said, constant change.
Right.
I think there's a fear among a lot of employees, because there's no job security anymore. Back when in the 80s and 90s, we had more of a sense of security. I've worked in organizations, as you said, in middle management jobs for 10 years at a time, 8 years at a time. Today, I think that's considered a no-no in your career. Actually, if if you're a leader, it's almost expected that you are going to strategically change jobs. But that puts stress on you, to figure out what's my next move, what's the right move. Do I leave if I have a job? If I get a new job, will I last or be successful? So I think that's another great area.
But it's
of
great
coaching.
for coaches, because I get
Wonderful for coaches.
I get a lot of that. It's
Yeah.
like, I want to move and I'm afraid to
Yeah.
move and I don't know. Yeah, so it's but that's not our goal, to make people miserable so they'll come to
Right,
us.
there you go.
It's just a nice side effect, but no, we don't really want that. Well, how do you, tell me, because I know that you're doing some work in Asian countries, and what are some of the challenges there? Because as we know, we're outsourcing to India, and we know that. I
Yeah.
mean, and Japan and is coming on strong as an economy. So, what are some of the changes, or not the changes, the challenges that you face in that case?
Well, I think depending upon which Asian country it is, but I think some generalities I can make are very often in their culture, you worry about face, or how you present yourself to one another. And so it's not common for people to speak up in a meeting, for example. And so now let's say we are in an American company, headquartered here in the States, but they have all of these large branches or divisions in different parts of the world, and they send people from the States over there, and they expect people to not only do things quickly, but speak up in meetings,
in fact, here
innovate.
it's an asset. I mean, women are told all the
Right.
time, make sure you ask at least 2 questions if you're in a board meeting, and
Right.
it's like, you have to talk.
Yeah, yeah. And so there, it would be considered rude if they did. So as you mentioned, so coaching people in these cultures, and I think I told you I was coaching a small team recently, and one of the things I realized was that while they did, speak up, through a lot of facilitation and prodding, if you will, I realized that it was so uncomfortable for them that I had to adjust. So now I'm going to start working with them more one-on-one versus in group settings, and my client was very amenable to making that change. So I think it's constantly observing what the cultural differences are and where they are going to be most comfortable, if you're going to coach them or teach them.
Oh.
Yeah.
And are employers, do they see the value in teaching their leaders how to coach? Or
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it depends on,
Really? Okay.
It depends on the corporate culture. So I came from my last corporate job, was I left there in 2003, but I came from a culture where we had internal coaching as a practice. And yeah, and I think I told you one of my last big projects, this was in financial services, was to create a coaching program starting at the top with the regional presidents, teaching them basic coaching skills, and then cascading it down to 350 branch managers who would then coach 6,000 financial advisors. Wow. So now I won't say that everybody, picked up the coaching skill naturally, but if some small percentage
I know
of them
coaches who
did.
haven't picked up the coaching skill. No, they picked it up, but there are some who are better than others.
Right.
Absolutely, yeah.
Exactly. And some people believe in it and some don't. They reject it.
Yeah,
and
it's like, we don't have time for this. It's hard line.
Exactly.
Get the profits out.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so thrilled that you're out there doing that, and it's like you're writing your own curriculum too for these programs, right?
Oh yeah,
You're the it's your baby. You're the creator.
I love to design learning, learning and performance strategies, if you will, and then design the curriculum that go along with them.
And do you, when you go in, do you design it specifically for that corporation, or do you have a standard? This works pretty much everywhere, and I'll just tweak it here and there.
Well, I know the process. As I said before, I think my sweet spot, again, if you will, is I'm very good at sizing up organizational cultures, and so helping them figure out what learning is really needed, like what that, the 80-20 rule, what 20% of a learning intervention is going to give them the 80% return in their business.
Wow, that's a nice
yeah.
goal to have, and a nice asset to have. Well, believe it or not, we've got like 40 seconds left.
Really? Wow.
When you're having fun, yes. So tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about, leadership coaching and training, or get you in the organization.
Sure. Well, my website, once again, is
on the bottom.
So you can learn all about us at talentpathways.com. You can reach us at 212-537-5791. And I'd love to hear from people and share and learn from other coaches.
Well, this has been fascinating. I thank you so much for being on Coach World TV, and I'm just thrilled that you're out there doing what you're doing. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much.